going to be a lot of fun. So welcome to Proyecto Podcast, the official podcast of the Latin Builders Association and a companion to Proyecto Magazine. I'm Gus Cabrera, the president of the LBA, and today we have one of our executive board members with us, our counsel, if you will, Neal Sklar. Neal Sklar is the founder and partner of Friedman Sklar, his own firm, an expert in construction law, certainly the person that I turn to when I have a question on construction law, on contracts law, and hopefully that's what we'll get to talk about today a little bit. Neal, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. So we always start talking about, whenever we have a guest, really their experience with the LBA, how they found the LBA, how they landed in the LBA, you know, what they see, what they enjoy. So I'm sure you got some good stories.
Yeah, so many people look at me and they see a gringo. Yeah. And they don't know that actually I have a very strong Cuban heritage. My parents were both born in Cuba. They left when Castro came to power in Castro came to power in 59. My parents left in 1961.
Well, your dad still has that Cuban restaurant in Miami Beach, right?
Yes, he does. Sazon Cuban Cuisine on 73rd Street and Collins Avenue.
I'm still yet to be invited, but I'm looking forward to it.
You're welcome anytime.
It could be an expensive proposition for your dad, but yeah, thank you.
It's all right. This will be our pleasure. But so my dad, by training, he started architectural school at the University of Havana.
Okay.
And then when the situation in Cuba became very difficult, he was able to transfer to Pratt University in New York.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Pratt University was actually helping a lot of Cuban immigrants at the time. And so went from sunny Cuba to very frigid New York. Spent 4 years over there. He separated from my mom actually right before the Bay of Pigs. He came to New York right before the Bay of Pigs, and the Bay of Pigs happened, and my mom couldn't leave Cuba for a while. So are
we getting anywhere close to the LBA yet, or we're still in the...
it goes to the Cuban heritage, right. but there came a point in time where they didn't think that they were going to see each other ever again.
Oh, wow.
Luckily, my mom was able to join him afterwards.
Okay. And
because of my upbringing, you know, going every Sunday to Islas Canarias down here and to Versailles, eating churros on Sunday night dinners, led to my dad eventually opening his own Cuban restaurant, wanting to do that. But anyway, he, by training as an architect, he became a licensed general contractor and a real estate developer, because the money was better in real estate development at the time. Started building single-family homes and graduated to apartment buildings and condominium towers, and he developed several projects on Miami Beach and in Surfside. So I always grew up in construction, and at the time I think my dad was involved from time to time in the LBA, came to certain events. And so when I graduated from law school, and I naturally gravitated to construction because that was my upbringing, and wanted to get involved in organizations, and the LBA was the first one I thought of. At that time, that was in the mid-'90s. I was in my mid-20s. And
you went UM undergrad, you told me, right? You're a UM guy?
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree is from University of Miami. Went to school with Vinny Testaverde and Michael Irvin and Benny Blades and Alonzo Highsmith, all those guys. Didn't know at the time that I wanted to go to law school. But because I was always arguing with my mom suggested, why don't you do that? It ended up being a good idea.
Yeah, it's worked out.
And then when I graduated, there was a shortage of construction lawyers around, and my boss at the time, who was the son of a prolific real estate developer, said, hey, I need you with your background in construction, because my dad's not the only architect in the family. My uncle is also an architect, and my older brother's an architect as well.
Oh, wow.
I've learned construction through osmosis, let's say. So he put me in the construction litigation department. I started off representing developers, After that, I segued. I was hired by a firm to head up their construction law department, representing primarily subcontractors. Then I moved to another firm representing bonding companies. And finally, I joined a very large national construction law firm representing primarily general contractors.
Okay.
And so 2 years ago, one of my partners at this large national firm and I decided to do things on our own. We started the law firm called Friedman Sklar. And
look at you now.
All of the clients that we thought were going to come with us came with us, and then some.
Oh, that's super.
And so the firm has grown very quickly from just 2 attorneys, myself and my partner Warren. Now we have 5 lawyers.
I saw that.
Hired 3 associates. We have 2 paralegals and an office manager.
That's super.
So things are going well.
Yeah. So one of the things that I know from you, having worked with you on with some of your clients, is you're very hands-on, right? You really. You mentioned the term, handling the legal side of a construction company from soup to nuts, from beginning to end, hands-on, right? That's you kind of like a unique calling card to a certain extent. So walk me through that, because contractors, by trade, love to build. They love to build stuff, but they're not great at paperwork. They're not great at administrative matters, and a multi-page contract in front of them is likely not to be read, at least certainly not with that eagle eye or that very focused perspective. That's kind of where you come in, right?
Yeah, so one of the benefits to working for a national construction law firm was we were representing some of the largest general contractors in the country on some of the largest projects. And the way we did things was to assign an attorney or a group of attorneys to specific projects. And so whatever arose on that project, we would handle. Whether we knew how to handle it or not at the time,
right.
If we didn't know, we would learn. And so I cut my teeth with this national law firm on the $2 billion, what ended up being $2.9 billion expansion of the North Terminal at Miami International Airport.
Okay.
I was lead counsel for the consortium of general contractors that built that project. It was over 1.3 million square feet of construction.
Wow.
I believe it was the largest construction project in the country at the time.
Wow.
And I was there on that site for the better part of 7 years, handling anything that arose. So everything from contract negotiation to risk management issues that took place, job site injuries, employment issues, litigation, claims resolution, you name it. I was in active negotiations with representatives from American Airlines, with Miami-Dade County. Both entities were funding the project in different ways. The project also received federal funding, so I had to be familiar with federal regulations.
Right.
So it was really a great experience for me, going from, representing developers on a specific project, or subcontractors, or bonding companies on specific issues, as opposed to the entire gamut. Mm-hmm. I remember one particular instance in a meeting, and some guy rushes into this meeting during the course of the project, and there was like 20 people around the table. And the individual was yelling for the head of the client that I was representing at the time, says, "We hit a fuel line. We hit a fuel line. We got to shut everything down." Everybody gets up from the table running. "Neal, come with me." Boom. And so there we're handling everything.
For a second there, I thought, we're out of coffee, like in an airplane. We're out of coffee. But,
yeah, jet fuel is a little bit more flammable than Cuban coffee. So from there, handling insurance-related issues, that whole experience led me to look at construction from a completely different perspective, and I learned how important it is to really be very careful in negotiating your contract up front. Many, like you mentioned, many contractors, they want to build.
Right.
They're not interested in reviewing paperwork or focusing on paperwork. one of the things that I guess initially surprised me, which I shouldn't have been surprised, was, my client representatives, the project managers or project executives who are supposed to be managing these multi-million-dollar projects would take the contract and stick it in a drawer. And they didn't know what their duties and obligations were. They had assumed, they've been doing this for 20, 30 years. They've been assuming that the way they've always done things is the way they're supposed to do things on this particular project.
Same as last project. We'll do it the same way.
And that's just not the way it is. Every contract is different, and every contract is different. Every project is different, every contract is different. Right. So I was teaching. I started teaching my clients what the contract was, what they were supposed to do, what certain terms and conditions would mean, because they would read it one way. Once I finally got them to read it, they would read it one way, but they didn't understand what certain things meant. And so I actually made a small industry out of teaching my clients the contract.
Right.
And they were very appreciative. I initially started doing it for free. I would go in my client's office and I said, listen, let me teach you this contract. This is very important for you to know. And then they started saying, Neal, no, we got to pay you for this because I'm spending so much time, teaching their staff. Wow. So I would go in there. Sometimes I'm teaching 20, 30 people the contract at the same time. And then invariably, you can't, have instant recall on a contract that's, over 100 pages with attachments and exhibits. And, invariably the project staff would pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, Neal, what about this? What about that? I had this situation. What do I do? What notice should I send? How should I draft it? Right. So I start drafting notices for all these people, and I start teaching them how to write. Yeah.
Now, for the record, I'm going to ask you a question, but we're not paying you on this question, all right? So this one, don't send me a bill. But that's interesting, right? Because I think you're right. I think contractors by trade and project managers, you're so focused on getting the project started, getting it going, that what we think or what you think are details, inconsequential details, right? Because they're not telling you about the project. Sometimes can be problematic if you don't fully understand them. Typically, what are a few things? And I don't need you to kind of give us your secret sauce of what you teach in your courses, but what are a few things that contractors should look for initially when they get their contract? Let's say it's a good half inch thick. What are the things that they need to understand? Where are the pitfalls?
So one of the most common problems that I see contractors fall into is that these guys have been taught, especially the guys that have been in the business for a while, they want to please their client. And they want their client to be happy. So I call it client delight. They're interested in client delight. And that interest in making sure their client is happy conflicts with putting their client on notice of certain problems that you're encountering on the site. And they say, oh, no, it's not a problem. We'll take care of it. And I try to make them understand how important it is that, listen, it might not be a problem now, but something that you have an impact here, it's going to impact things down the line, and things tend to snowball that they don't understand over here. So you really need to be careful and put the owner on notice of things that the contract says you need to put the owner on notice of. Because if the owner doesn't have notice of something, or you just tell them something verbally, that's not going to hold any water in court down the road.
Particularly when you got liquidated damages and things of that nature, that can really, a minor thing that eats away X number of days from your project. Yeah. Right at the end, they're going to forget. They're going to forget about those little favors you did in the front end.
And developers are in the business of making money, and so the developers, rightfully so, they want to make sure that they follow the contract on their end, because they're paying a lawyer to draft a contract to protect their interests. So, and they're going to protect their interests. So general contractors need to protect their own interests. And there's a way to phrase things. You don't have to send a notice that's in a aggressive tone of voice. You can phrase it in such a way as, listen, we're just letting you know that, pursuant to this section of the contract, that such and such a thing happened. And because this happened, we are reserving our rights to, a time extension or additional compensation or whatever it might be. Yeah. Other things, you're placing the owner on notice of potential safety issues, potential employment issues. There's something in the drawings that has the possibility of conflicting with code. There's an unforeseen condition that was encountered that the owner doesn't know about. I mean, you're the owner's eyes and boots on the ground.
Right.
So, your job is to keep the owner advised, and my recommendation is to keep them advised as often as possible and make sure it's in writing.
Yeah, and one interesting aspect of that is that sometimes you mentioned developer when there's a business to business type or a private engagement, it's one way. But it always feels to me that it's heightened or a little more critical to be that granular in your focus and contract when the owner is a public entity, when you're dealing with it be a school board or the county or the city or a particular public entity, a parking authority or whatnot. Those contracts tend to be a little bit one-sided. They tend to lean towards the owner, and you really, really, really have to stay within those guardrails of the contract, right?
Yeah. So a lot of those public contracts are really not going to be negotiable. I mean, there's certain things that you could ask questions about. There's certain things that, on a project-by-project basis, you can try to see how flexible the governmental entity will be on those. But by and large, the contract is what it is. So the key there is to understanding what your risk issues are and making sure internally you have those risk issues in mind when constructing the project.
Okay.
So that you can protect yourself either downstream or internally with making sure you follow the requirements of the contract. And many times, you're going to have a public job. Let's just say, for example, the work out at Miami International Airport. You have county governmental requirements, Miami-Dade Aviation Department requirements of Miami-Dade County ordinances that you have to comply with.
Right.
Minority business enterprise requirements. But a lot of these projects receive federal funding.
Right.
So you need to be aware of those federal funding requirements, follow those,
all this good stuff.
See what requirements may conflict with one another so that you can understand how to resolve those conflicts, ask questions ahead of time, and build risk into your contract so that at least you're being compensated for undertaking that additional risk.
Right.
So many times we'll review the contract, review the applicable ordinances that apply both at the local, the state, and the federal levels, and we'll provide our clients with a memorandum that spells all those things out, and then we'll walk them through it so that make sure they understand it. That said, I don't want you to get the impression that all we do is represent general contractors. Yes, we represent a lot of general contractors.
You beat me to the punch. I was going to ask, what other entities do you work with? I know you mentioned developers and contractors as well, but kind of give it an idea of your client roster.
So because we handle everything, soup to nuts, and on environmental issues that pop up on a project, we have created a niche for ourselves over, I guess, the past couple of decades that, if a general contractor comes to us to handle something, we're able to take them from the very inception of the project to the very end of the project. So we know, and we'd like to believe that we know the contractor's business, as well as they do.
Right.
And that's very helpful in a variety of ways. But by the same token, because we know that side of the table very well, we're also able to effectively represent developers
Right.
who are interested in making sure that they understand their cost risks on projects as well.
Right.
So we represent a number of developers in varying different things, but primarily in contract negotiation.
Right. Negotiations with their contractor.
With their contractors, as long as we don't have a conflict.
Of course.
As long as we don't have a conflict. And so we do that actually nationwide.
Okay.
So there are developers, we're handling projects in North Carolina, in Washington, D.C., in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Texas, California. And representing contractors in those areas as well.
Yeah.
It's one of the areas of growth that we have. I had to miss our annual fishing tournament for the first time, and I can't remember how long because I had to assist a client with a project in Texas.
Well, you missed a good one. You missed a good one. So,
yeah,
but Frank Soto didn't make it either. So.
Oh, is that right?
He couldn't make it either. So we had no construction attorney representation in Playa Largo this year, but we did have a great time. So I mentioned Frank because I know that you guys have a friendly rivalry. Our two construction attorneys, along with Nick Siegfried, you guys had a great panel at the expo earlier this year. That's really, which by the way, you can find in our YouTube, LBA YouTube channel.
That's right.
If you want to learn, some of the things that you guys spoke about.
Yes, no, Frank is a great guy. He represents a lot of condominium associations.
And I brought him up because we made fun of you when he was on.
Yes, I saw that
a little
podcast.
bit.
But Frank's a great guy. Actually, one of the new cases we just got was a 558 condo defect case.
Okay.
And Frank and I have collaborated, like you mentioned, at the expo. And so I wanted to bounce a few things off of him, and he was good enough to engage in that intellectual conversation back and forth, and we do that from time to time. I do that with Nick Siegfried. I do that with others. We may compete from time to time, but what we do is a little bit different.
Right.
And so we don't really step on each other's toes. And actually, I prefer, whenever I'm dealing on a matter, whether it's a contract negotiation or whether it's litigation, I prefer dealing with a knowledgeable construction attorney on the other side.
Of course.
Because that cuts through a lot of the BS.
Right.
We're able to get to the nitty-gritty. We're able to resolve things, I think, more promptly and effectively than we would if somebody else comes on board as a construction lawyer, but he's a lawyer that's handled a few construction liens, doesn't really know construction law,
right?
Like me or Frank or Nick.
Well, we're very lucky at the LBA because not just because you're here, but we really have some of the top construction lawyers in town.
Yes,
as part of our board, as part of our group, and it's a very easy reference point for us, for our guys to have a question to be able to go to. So this has been a lot of fun. To wrap it up, if you can kind of just give your elevator pitch. I'll say 15 seconds, but I know you'll never be able to stay inside of 15 seconds.
We're done already?
We're done already.
I was ready to keep going.
This is the longest podcast I've had all day today.
Is that right? Okay.
But really, where they can get a hold of you, what the best way to communicate with you, the type of folks that may need you and how they can get a hold of you and kind of answer any questions that they can have and stuff like that. So.
Sure. So as we mentioned earlier, the name of my law firm is Friedman Sklar. We have offices in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. You could reach me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on my mobile phone, which is 305-332-5767. Many lawyers don't give their clients their cell phone numbers. I do. And I respond promptly unless I'm in a meeting or in court or at a hearing or something like that. I respond. I make it a point to respond within 24 hours. You can learn more about me and my firm at www.fs-legal.com. And it would be an honor and a pleasure for me to help any members or members of the construction industry with their legal issues, and obviously any members of the LBA.
Awesome. Neal, thanks for coming. It was great having you as
Thanks
always.
for
Enjoy
having
the
me.
conversation. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us.